The Valorian ship hung above Earth like a silver moon. It was beautiful in a cold way, all smooth lines and glowing panels. Inside, Ambassador Kethvor looked down at the blue planet with something close to pity. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he studied the primitive world below. "They still use chemical rockets," said his assistant, a young female named Cyrenix. Her voice held disbelief. "They have not even discovered quantum travel." "They are children," Kethvor agreed. "But the Galactic Council says we must assess them. The humans have been sending signals into space for over a century. We cannot ignore them forever." The Valorian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had seen countless species rise and fall. Most were like the humans seemed to be now young, loud, and utterly unaware of the dangers that lurked between the stars. The Empire's job was to guide such species, or, when necessary, to contain them. "Send the greeting message," Kethvor ordered. "Use simple terms. I doubt they will understand anything complex." 3 days later, Kethvor stood in the United Nations building in New York City. He had expected the humans to be afraid or confused. Instead, they seemed excited. Their leader, a woman named Secretary General Chen, smiled warmly as she shook his hand. "Welcome to Earth," she said. "We have waited a long time for this moment." Kethvor studied her face. Humans were strange creatures, 2 eyes, soft skin, and bodies that seemed far too fragile to survive in a hostile universe. Their cities were impressive in a basic way, full of tall buildings made of glass and steel. But he had seen the same thing 1,000 times before on 1,000 other worlds. "The Valorian Empire brings greetings," he said through his translator device. "We have watched your species for some time. We believe you may be ready to join the galactic community." The humans exchanged looks of joy. Kethvor almost felt sorry for them. They did not know what joining the Empire really meant. "Before we proceed," he continued, "we must conduct an assessment. The Empire needs to understand your species, your history, your culture, your capabilities." Secretary General Chen nodded. "Of course, what would you like to see?" "Everything," Kethvor replied. "But let us start with your greatest achievements. Show me what humanity is most proud of." Over the next week, they showed him their space program, their medical advances, their art and music. Kethvor was polite but unimpressed. The Valorians had cured all diseases long ago. They had walked on stars while humans were still painting on cave walls. "Is there anything else?" he asked on the 7th day. "Perhaps something more historical?" Secretary General Chen hesitated. "We have many museums. Science museums, art museums, history museums." "What kind of history?" "All kinds, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some of our most preserved and maintained museums are our war museums." Kethvor's ears twitched with interest. "War museums?" "Yes, we have. Many conflicts in our history. We preserve them so we never forget." This was expected. All primitive species went through a violent phase. The Valorians had their own dark past, though they had moved beyond it long ago. Perhaps seeing how the humans dealt with their barbaric history would be educational. "I would like to see one," Kethvor said. The Secretary General's face became hard to read. "Are you sure our war museums can be difficult for outsiders?" "I have seen many things in my long life," Kethvor assured her. "I doubt anything could surprise me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Very well, we will take you to the Imperial War Museum in London, then perhaps to some others if you wish." The next morning, Kethvor and his team flew to England. The museum was a large building with old cannons outside its entrance. Kethvor barely glanced at them as he walked inside. The first room was filled with weapons from what the humans called World War I. Kethvor examined the rifles and machine guns with mild interest. They were primitive, yes, but showed some basic understanding of ballistics. This war lasted 4 years, the human guide explained. Over 17 million people died. Kethvor nodded politely. Such numbers were sad but not unusual for primitive species. He had seen worse. Then they moved to the section about World War II. The guide led them through room after room of displays. Kethvor saw tanks, fighter planes, and bombs of increasing size. He saw photographs of destroyed cities and starving prisoners. He saw documents describing something called the Holocaust, a systematic attempt to kill an entire group of people. How many died? Cyrenix asked quietly. In this war alone, over 70 million. Kethvor felt something cold settle in his stomach. 70 million. That was more than the entire population of many worlds. They came to a room at the end of the hall. Inside was a single display, a model of a simple-looking metal device. This is a replica of Little Boy, the guide said. It was an atomic bomb, the first one ever used in war. What does it do? Kethvor asked. The guide's face was pale. It releases energy from splitting atoms. When this bomb was dropped on a city called Hiroshima, it killed 80,000 people instantly. The total deaths reached over 200,000. From one weapon? Yes, and that was our first attempt. A primitive bomb by today's standards. The guide paused. Would you like to see what we have developed since then? Kethvor found himself unable to speak. He simply nodded. The guide led them to another section. On the wall were diagrams of modern nuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, tactical nukes, and delivery systems that could strike anywhere on the planet within minutes. Our current arsenal could destroy all life on Earth several times over, the guide said matter-of-factly. We have approximately 13,000 nuclear weapons worldwide. The largest can produce an explosion 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Cyrenix grabbed Kethvor's arm. Her face had turned a sickly shade of purple. "Ambassador," she whispered. Kethvor could not respond. He was staring at a photograph on the wall, a mushroom cloud rising over a test site. The humans had made this. These soft, fragile creatures who still used chemical rockets had built weapons that could end worlds. "We should continue," Secretary General Chen said quietly. "There is still much to see." The next stop was a museum in Washington, D.C. called the National World War II Museum. Kethvor thought he was prepared for it after what he had seen in London. He was wrong. The Americans had a different way of showing their history. Where the British Museum had been quiet and solemn, this place was loud with the sounds of war. They walked through recreated battle scenes while explosions echoed from speakers. Videos played on every wall, showing real footage from the conflict. "We entered the war after Japan attacked our naval base at Pearl Harbor," the American guide explained. "Within 4 years, we had mobilized 16 million soldiers and produced weapons at a rate the world had never seen." "How fast?" Kethvor asked. "At our peak, we were building a new ship every single day. We produced 300,000 aircraft in 4 years, 2 million trucks, 47 billion rounds of ammunition." Kethvor did the calculations in his head. The numbers were staggering. These primitive beings had transformed their entire society into a war machine in less than half a decade. The Valorian Empire took centuries to mobilize for major conflicts. "Your people did this willingly?" he asked. Many did. Women worked in factories. Children collected scrap metal. Everyone contributed. When humans are united against a threat, there is very little we cannot do. They walked past displays showing the island-hopping campaign in the Pacific. Kethvor saw photographs of Marines storming beaches under heavy fire, charging into certain death without hesitation. Why would they do this? Cyrenix asked. Why run toward weapons that would kill them? The guide looked at her with something Kethvor could not identify. Because the soldiers behind them needed to advance. Because victory required sacrifice. Because that is what humans do when we believe in something. They came to a section about D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. Kethvor watched footage of thousands of young men climbing out of boats and running across open beaches while machine guns cut them down like grass. 10,000 casualties on the first day, the guide said. We knew it would be bloody. We went anyway. By the end of the war, we had liberated an entire continent. Kethvor thought about the Valorian military doctrine. Their soldiers were highly trained professionals who avoided risk whenever possible. Battles were fought with drones and automated systems. The idea of sending thousands of young people to their deaths was unthinkable. And yet the humans had done exactly that. Not once, but repeatedly throughout their history. I think I need some air, he said. Outside, he stood in the warm sunlight and tried to process what he had seen. Secretary General Chen joined him after a few minutes. Are you all right, Ambassador? Your species, he struggled to find the right words. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Primitive beings, simple creatures who would be easy to guide and control. He looked at her. But you are something else entirely. Secretary General Chen nodded slowly. We know what others think of us. That is why we agreed to show you our museums. We believe in honesty, even when the truth is ugly. Why preserve all of this? Kethvor asked. Why not hide your violent past? Because hiding it would mean we have not learned from it. We keep these museums so every generation understands what we are capable of. The good and the bad. The heroism and the horror. Kethvor was silent for a long moment. Then he said, What else would you show me? There are many more museums. The Vietnam War Memorial, the Korean War Museum, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, museums for wars you have never heard of in countries all over the world. She paused. But there is one place I think you should see above all others. Where? Hiroshima, the city that was destroyed by the first atomic bomb. They have built a peace museum there. The flight to Japan took several hours. Kethvor spent the time reviewing what he had learned. His initial report to the Empire had described humans as a primitive species ready for integration. Now he would have to revise that assessment entirely. Hiroshima was a modern city, full of tall buildings and busy streets. It was hard to believe that it had been completely destroyed less than a century ago. We rebuilt, the Japanese guide said simply. That is what humans do. The Peace Memorial Museum was located near the blast site. Outside stood a ruined building, a domed structure with its skeleton exposed to the sky. We left this building as it was after the bomb, the guide explained. A reminder of what happened here. Inside the museum, Kethvor saw things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Photographs of people with their skin melting from their bodies. Shadows burned into concrete walls where human beings had stood before being vaporized. Children's toys twisted and blackened by the heat. The bomb exploded 600 meters above the city, the guide said. The temperature at the blast site reached millions of degrees. people closest to the center simply ceased to exist. Serenix had to leave the room. Kethvor forced himself to stay. They showed him testimonies from survivors, the Hibakusha they were called, old men and women who had been children when the bomb fell. They spoke of fire and death and a world turned to ash, but they also spoke of rebuilding, of hope, of a promise to make sure it never happened again. "You did this to yourselves," Kethvor said quietly, "and you survived." "We did more than survive," the guide replied. "We learned. Japan was once a militaristic empire. Now we have a constitution that forbids war. We turned our greatest tragedy into our greatest lesson." Outside the museum, there was a flame that had been burning since 1964. The guide told him it would keep burning until the last nuclear weapon was destroyed. "You truly believe you can eliminate these weapons?" Kethvor asked. "We believe we must try. That is another thing about humans. We always try, even when success seems impossible." That night, Kethvor could not sleep. He sat in his hotel room, staring at the city lights of Hiroshima, a city that had been reborn from nuclear fire. He thought about the Valorians and their peaceful empire. They had achieved peace through control, by eliminating threats before they could grow, by keeping dangerous species contained. It was efficient and logical. But the humans had achieved something different. They had built weapons that could destroy worlds, and then they had chosen not to use them. They had committed terrible acts of violence, and then they had built museums to make sure they never forgot. They were not peaceful despite their violent nature. They were working toward peace because of it. Kethvor opened his communication device and began composing a new message to the Empire. It would be the most important report he had ever written. The Imperial Council of Veloria convened 3 weeks later. 12 High Lords sat in a circle of floating chairs, their faces projected on screens across the Empire. They were the rulers of a civilization that spanned 10,000 worlds. Kethvor stood in the center of the chamber, feeling very small. "Your report has caused quite a disturbance, Ambassador," said High Lord Vextorin. He was the oldest member of the council, with silver skin and eyes like black holes. "You suggest that we should, what, be afraid of these humans?" "Not afraid, High Lord. Cautious. Cautious of a species that still uses chemical rockets." Another council member laughed. "They cannot even leave their own star system." "Not yet," Kethvor said, "but consider their progress. They went from their first powered flight to landing on their moon in just 66 years. They went from discovering atomic energy to building weapons that could destroy their entire planet in less than a decade. Which only proves they are dangerous," Vextorin said. "Like all primitive species, we have dealt with such threats before." "Have we?" Kethvor pulled up images from his visit. The council members looked at photographs of nuclear explosions, of battlefields covered with dead, of cities reduced to rubble. In their last major war, they killed 70 million of their own kind. 70 million! And they did not stop fighting until one side achieved total victory. The chamber was silent. "They do not surrender," Kethvor continued. "They do not accept defeat. When facing extinction, they become more dangerous, not less. I have studied their history extensively. There are countless examples of small human forces defeating much larger enemies through sheer determination and willingness to sacrifice. Determination cannot stop a plasma cannon," one council member said. "No, but consider what they might do if they obtained plasma cannons." Kethvor changed the display to show human technological progress over time. In less than 200 years, they went from riding animals to splitting atoms. In another 100 years, they developed computers that fit in their pockets and connected their entire world. If we give them access to galactic technology, we would never do such a thing, Vextoran said firmly. Others might. The Krexan would happily arm them against us. The Syndicate would trade weapons for resources. We cannot keep them isolated forever. High Lord Sierrakoth, a female with deep blue skin, leaned forward. What do you recommend, Ambassador? Integration. Real integration, not the controlled absorption we usually perform. We should make them partners, not subjects. The council erupted in protest. Voices overlapped, all of them angry. Partners with primitives? They would never accept our guidance. This is madness. Kethvor raised his hand. May I show you one more thing? The chamber fell quiet. Kethvor activated a video recording. It showed the inside of the Hiroshima Peace Museum, the photographs of destruction, the melted artifacts, the testimonies of survivors. These are the humans' war museums, he said. They do not hide their violent past, they preserve it. They teach it to every generation. They make their children walk through these halls and see what war really means. The video changed to show the flame in Hiroshima, burning endlessly. This fire will burn until the last nuclear weapon is destroyed. The humans lit it themselves, the same species that built the weapons in the first place. They are not proud of what they have done. They are not trying to forget. They are trying to become better. Sierrakoth spoke softly. We have nothing like this. No, Kethvor agreed. We do not. When the Empire conquered the Thraxian worlds, we destroyed the evidence. When we burned the forests of Kelmer, we rewrote the history books. We have achieved peace, but we have done so by forgetting our past, not by learning from it. You would compare the Empire to these creatures. Vextoran's voice was cold. I would ask us to look honestly at ourselves, High Lord. We think we are peaceful because we have not fought a major war in 3,000 years, but we maintain that peace through fear and control. The humans are trying to achieve something different, something harder. The council debated for hours. Some members wanted to quarantine Earth to prevent the humans from ever reaching the stars. Others suggested a preemptive strike, better to eliminate the threat now than face it later. But Sierrakoth sided with Kethvor, and slowly other voices joined them. The humans are dangerous, she said finally. That much is clear, but they are also capable of change. They look at their own violence and feel shame. They try to do better. That is not something we see in most species. What do you propose? Vextoran asked wearily. A trial period. We offer them limited partnership access to some technology, membership in certain councils. We watch them carefully. If they prove themselves, we expand the relationship. If not, she let the sentence hang. The vote was close. 7-5 in favor of the trial. Kethvor returned to Earth with the news. Secretary General Chen listened carefully, her face unreadable. A trial period, she repeated. They still think of us as children. They think of you as something far more complicated than children, Kethvor replied. They are afraid of you, though they would never admit it. Afraid of us? She seemed genuinely surprised. Your museums showed me something the Empire has never seen before. A species that is fully aware of its own capacity for destruction and is actively working to overcome it. That makes you unpredictable, and unpredictable species are dangerous. Secretary General Chen smiled slightly. We do not think of ourselves as dangerous. That is because you have only ever fought each other. Wait until you meet some of the other species in the galaxy. Then you will understand what you are truly capable of." She was quiet for a moment. "Will the trial be fair?" "It will be watched very closely. There are those who want you to fail, but there are also those who hope you succeed." Kethvor paused. "I am one of them." "Why?" He thought about the flame in Hiroshima, about the photographs of children's toys melted by atomic fire, about a species that had built the power to destroy itself and then chosen not to use it. "Because I think the galaxy needs you," he said, "more than it knows." 5 years passed. In galactic terms, it was less than the blink of an eye. For humanity, it was a revolution. The Valorians had given them access to quantum communication technology. Within 18 months, human engineers had not only replicated it, but improved on the design. The Empire's scientists were baffled. "It should have taken them decades," reported the chief technology observer. "They barely understood the principles when we showed them. Now they are teaching us." The humans had a different approach to problem-solving than the Valorians. Where the Empire built elegant solutions through careful planning, humans threw thousands of researchers at a problem and tried everything at once. They failed constantly, but they also succeeded in ways no one expected. "They call it innovation," Kethvor explained to the council. "They believe that failure is a necessary step toward success. They are not afraid to make mistakes." "Reckless," Vextorin muttered. "Effective," Sirakoth countered. The real test came in the 3rd year, when the Krexan Collective attacked a human colony ship. The Krexan were an aggressive species that existed on the edges of imperial space. They raided trading vessels and sometimes attacked isolated worlds. The Empire had never been able to eliminate them completely. They were too spread out, too willing to take losses. The human ship was called the Hope of Tomorrow. It carried 10,000 colonists to a new world on the frontier. The Krexan intercepted it in deep space, far from any help. What happened next was recorded by the ship's cameras and transmitted across the galaxy. The Krexan had 3 warships against 1 unarmed transport. They demanded surrender. The human captain, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez, refused. "We have 10,000 civilians on board," she told them. "Families, children. If you want them, you will have to come and take them." The Krexan commander laughed. "You have no weapons, no defenses. What can you possibly do?" Captain Rodriguez smiled. "Let me show you." The Hope of Tomorrow was a civilian ship, but its crew included retired military officers, engineers, and scientists. In the hours before the Krexan arrived, they had been busy. They had converted the ship's mining lasers into weapons. They had built makeshift missiles from fuel tanks and navigation computers. They had even figured out how to overload the quantum communicator in a way that could disrupt enemy shields. "This is insane," the Krexan commander said when the first laser cut into his ship. "They are improvising weapons from civilian equipment." The battle lasted 6 hours. The Hope of Tomorrow took heavy damage. 217 colonists died. But when it was over, all 3 Krexan ships were drifting wrecks, and the human vessel was limping toward the nearest friendly port. The recording spread across the galaxy like fire. Species that had never heard of humans watched in amazement as civilians defeated trained warriors. The Valorian Council called an emergency session. "How did they do this?" Vextorin demanded. "They had no weapons." "They made weapons," Kethvor said. "That is what humans do. They adapt, they improvise, they refuse to accept defeat." They lost over 200 people and saved over 9,000. In human terms, that is victory. The aftermath of the battle changed everything. Other species began reaching out to humanity, interested in alliances. The Krexan, for the first time in their history, requested a peace negotiation, and the humans built a museum. Kethvor attended the opening ceremony. It was a small building on the colony world of New Geneva, where the hope of tomorrow had finally landed. Inside were displays showing the battle, the improvised weapons, the damaged equipment, the names and faces of everyone who had died. "We do not celebrate this," Captain Rodriguez told him. She had survived the battle but lost her husband in the fighting. "We remember it. There is a difference. The galaxy sees you as heroes," Kethvor said. "The galaxy did not bury the dead." Her voice was hard but not bitter. 217 people, engineers, doctors, farmers, a 12-year-old girl who wanted to be a pilot. They died because we had no choice but to fight. "You could have surrendered." "The Krexan take slaves. We knew what would happen if we surrendered. Death was better." She paused. "But that does not make death good. It just makes it necessary." Kethvor looked at the wall of names. Each one represented a life ended, a story cut short. The humans did not seem to see glory in their victory. They saw cost. "You build these museums everywhere," he said. "On Earth and now here. Why?" "Because war is terrible," Rodriguez said simply. "Even when it is necessary, it is terrible. If we forget that, we become something worse than the enemies we fight. The Empire does not think this way. Victory is victory. The costs are simply costs." "Then maybe the Empire has forgotten something important." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Every person who dies in a war was loved by someone. They had dreams, hopes, fears. When we build these museums, we say that their lives mattered, that they were not just statistics." Kethvor thought about the Valorian wars of expansion. Billions had died over the centuries. Their names were not remembered. Their stories were not told. "You make me uncomfortable," he admitted. "Your species, your way of thinking." "Good," Rodriguez said. "Being comfortable with war is the first step toward accepting it as normal. We never want war to feel normal." The museum on New Geneva became a symbol across the galaxy. Other species began to visit, curious about these strange beings who built monuments to their own failures. Some were confused, others were intrigued. And slowly, attitudes began to change. 20 years after first contact, Kethvor stood before the Galactic Assembly. It was the largest gathering of species in recorded history, over 3,000 civilizations represented in a single chamber. He was old now, his silver skin faded to gray, but his voice was still strong. "I was the first Valorian to visit Earth," he said. "I went there expecting to find primitives, simple creatures who could be easily controlled. Instead, I found something that changed my understanding of the universe." The assembly was silent. Everyone knew why they were here. The vote that would happen today would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. The humans showed me their war museums. They showed me the evidence of their violence, their cruelty, their capacity for destruction. They did not hide any of it. They wanted me to see exactly what they were. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "At first, I was horrified. A species that had built weapons capable of ending all life on their planet. A species that had killed hundreds of millions of their own kind in wars. I thought they were too dangerous to be trusted." Murmurs spread through the assembly. Many species still felt this way about humans. But then I realized something. The humans were not proud of their violence. They were ashamed of it. They built those museums not to celebrate war, but to condemn it. Every generation of humans walks through those halls and learns what their species is capable of at its worst. He pulled up an image of the flame in Hiroshima, still burning after all these years. This fire has burned for over 100 years. It will burn until the last nuclear weapon is destroyed. The humans lit it as a promise to themselves, a promise that they would never forget, never repeat, never stop working toward peace. How many of our civilizations can say the same? He looked around the chamber. The Valorian Empire has conquered hundreds of worlds. We do not build museums for the species we destroyed. We do not remember their names. We simply forgot. Vextoran, ancient and frail, tried to protest. But Kethvor continued. In the 20 years since first contact, the humans have done remarkable things. They have improved our technology. They have established peaceful relations with species we have fought for centuries. They have built museums on 30 different worlds, each one dedicated to remembering the cost of conflict. But more importantly, they have taught us to look at ourselves, to ask uncomfortable questions, to wonder if our peace is truly peace or just the silence of those we have silenced. Secretary General Chen, now an elderly woman with white hair, rose from the human delegation. She walked slowly to the central platform where she stood beside Kethvor. Humanity does not claim to be perfect, she said. We have made terrible mistakes. We have committed terrible crimes. But we believe that acknowledging our failures is the first step toward transcending them. She pressed a button and images appeared throughout the chamber. War museums from Earth and beyond, memorials to the dead, flames that would burn until their purposes were fulfilled. These are our monuments, not to victory but to loss, not to glory but to grief. We build them because we believe that every life has value, every death has meaning. Every war leaves scars that should never be forgotten. We propose today that the Galactic Assembly adopt the same principles. That we build a museum here in the heart of galactic civilization dedicated to all the conflicts in our history. The wars between species, the genocides, the conquests, all of it preserved and remembered. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species shouted in anger, others called out in support. The Krexan representative, surprisingly, stood and bowed in the human gesture of respect. When the noise died down, Chen continued, "We know this is difficult. It is easier to forget. It is easier to pretend that the past did not happen, but the past always returns. The species we wronged remember, even if we do not. The hatred we planted grows, even if we ignore it. True peace cannot be built on silence. It must be built on acknowledgement, on apology, on the commitment to do better." Kethvor watched the assembly deliberate. He saw species that had been enemies for millennia sitting together, discussing the proposal. He saw the Valorians, his own people, struggling with the idea of admitting their past wrongs. The vote took 3 days. Alliances shifted. Arguments raged. Species that had never agreed on anything found common ground in their discomfort. In the end, the proposal passed. Not unanimously, that would have been impossible, but by a margin large enough to matter. The Galactic Memorial Complex was built over the next decade. It was the largest structure in known space, containing records of every conflict in galactic history. Species that had been erased were named again. Wars that had been forgotten were remembered. The cost of violence was laid bare for all to see, and at the center burned a flame modeled after the one in Hiroshima. It would burn, the assembly declared, until true peace was achieved across the galaxy. Kethvor visited the memorial one last time before his death. He was very old now, the last of the original contact team. Cyrenix had passed years ago. Most of the council members he had known were gone. But Sarah Rodriguez was there. She had become humanity's greatest ambassador, traveling the galaxy to help other species build their own museums. She was old too, her hair completely white, but her eyes were still sharp. "You did this," Kethvor told her. "Your species, you changed everything." Rodriguez shook her head. "We just asked a question that no one else was asking. What do you do with your past? Do you hide it or face it? Most species choose to hide it." "We tried that once. It did not work." She smiled sadly. "The First World War was supposed to be the war to end all wars. 20 years later, we were fighting again, worse than before. We learned that ignoring history just means repeating it." They stood in silence, watching the flame burn. Around them, beings from 1,000 worlds walked through the memorial, reading about conflicts they had never known, species they had never met. "Do you think this will work?" Kethvor asked. "Can we really end war?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," she admitted. "Humans have been trying for thousands of years. We have failed again and again, but we keep trying." "Why?" "Because the alternative is to give up, and humans do not give up." She turned to face him, this ancient alien who had witnessed her species' first steps into the galaxy. "You thought we were primitive when you first came to Earth. Maybe we were, but we knew something your empire had forgotten." "What?" "That strength is not just about power. It is about honesty, about looking at yourself clearly and deciding to be better. Our war museums were not signs of our weakness. They were signs of our strength, the strength to face our own darkness and choose light instead." Kethvor thought about this as he looked at the flame. A fire lit by a species that had once tried to destroy itself, now burning at the center of galactic civilization. A reminder that peace required vigilance, that history demanded remembrance, that hope needed action. "We were wrong about you," he said finally. "The Empire, the galaxy. We thought you were dangerous because you knew how to make war, but you were dangerous for a different reason entirely." "What reason?" "You knew how to remember. And in a galaxy that had chosen to forget, that was the most revolutionary thing of all." Rodriguez smiled. It was the smile of someone who had seen war and survived it, who had lost friends and buried enemies, who had walked through the worst of human history and still believed in the best. "We are only getting started," she said. Above them, the flame burned on. It would burn for a long time yet. But somewhere in the galaxy, on world after world, museums were being built, stories were being told, and the long process of healing was finally beginning. Humanity had shown the galaxy its violence, and in doing so had taught it something far more important: how to hope.